Hi, this is Steve from Codename1, and I am going to do my own tutorial for getting started with CodeRAD. It is the tutorial that you'll find in the CodeRAD manual in the second chapter called Getting Started. So this is what the tutorial looks like. And the first instruction is to go to the Codename1 initializer at start.codename1.com. And we're going to select the CodeRAD MVC starter project. And I'm going to change the package to MyRAD. Actually, I'll just leave it as my app. And I'll change the main class to MyRAD app. And after I press download, it'll take a few seconds while the server puts together the project for me to download. And I created a directory for this. There we go. And we'll put it there. And we'll call this just MyRAD app. And it's going to download as a zip archive. So I'll extract this. And I'm going to open this in IntelliJ. Now, this is going to open up. It is a Maven project, and bear with me here. For the sake of the video, I've made all of my text super big. So it's going to make it a little bit hard to fit some of the things on the screen. I'm not sure why it opened all these. Close all. So with this project opened, the first thing I'm going to do is just run it to make sure that it runs. Click the run option. Run in simulator should have been the run option that was selected. Now the first time it runs here, it might take a little while to build because it has to download all the dependencies maybe for the first time. Subsequent runs will be much faster. And when it's done, it will open up in the Codename1 simulator. And there is my default application. It's just a very simple app. And I'm going to reorient my screen here so that I can see both the simulator and IntelliJ. So let's take a look under the hood for a moment before we proceed, just to see what's inside this project. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It's a multi-module Maven project. So it's got a POM file in the root of the project, and most of the application code, though, is in the common submodule. If you open this up, it'll have another POM file that's got its own settings for the common module. If you expand the source, main, this is where the main source is, and we've got 3 different types of source in this file. There's CSS, and so we've got a theme.css file that has all of the styles for our app. You can open that up and see. So it's got some a few styles built in: start page h2, start page link. All of these are just used for this sample text. We're going to early on just delete all this out. For Java, it's going to have the single start page, MyRAD app, and this is the start page controller. So there's really not a lot here. MyRAD app extends application controller, which is a CodeRAD class. All applications will have an application controller, and it'll usually be the main file that your app starts with. And CodeRAD apps are all event-based. So what happens at the very start is your application controller is going to receive a start event. And so this is just a fancy way of saying if the event, because it could be all the events are passing through here, if the event is a start event and the start event hasn't already been processed to show a form, because when you reopen the app, it may by default just show the same form that was there last time, so we don't need to do anything. Then we mark the event to say we are showing the form, and we create a start page controller. And this is the form controller for the start page. Now let's look at what's in the RAD directory. This is where all of our view templates are. So if we drill down, RAD views, and then we've got the familiar Java package namespace structure. And startpage.xml is our view file. So this is what we see here. It's fairly straightforward, straight across. We've got this label that specifies an icon that is just downloading off of the Codename One website with a little bit of specifications for how to scale the image. And that's what we see here. Actually, this whole Codename One image is that. We've got the start page text, span label. So it's using the text IID start page text, which we saw in our theme. This is so it's setting the font size to 0.7 rem. That's 0.7 of the line height of the default font size, which we've set up in constants. If we go down, we can see there's the button for Learn More. There's the Learn More button. A source code overview, so we've got a label, some span labels, and some more buttons that take us somewhere. So that's our starting code. But what I'd like to do is get rid of most of this. So let's actually get rid of all the stuff inside the Y tag, because the Y tag is our root, and let's just say hello, label hello world, and we'll save it. And you see that our screen has reloaded. This is our simulator now, looks like hello world, and there's no title. Let's add a title. To our form, and this should update in just a second here. So there's a good starting place. We're now at hello world. And this brings us to our first topic, which is hot reload, which I already have enabled in my simulator, as you can see by the way it automatically updated when I changed the contents of the startpage.xml. So if I go into the simulator and you go into the Tools menu, under Hot Reload, you'll have three options. The default is actually disabled, which means that if you make a change to your source, it's not going to pick up those changes until you restart the simulator by rebuilding it in IntelliJ. The next option, which I have it set on, is it will reload the simulator automatically. This is much faster than doing a full rebuild in IntelliJ, as it incrementally compiles only what was changed, and it automatically does it, so it saves you from hitting a few buttons. The last option, which requires CodeRAD, because the first option would work for any project, but the last option, which requires CodeRAD, reloads the current form that you're on. Now, if you're working on a form that isn't the main form, say you're working on a form, say your app requires you to go through a bunch of welcome screens before you finally get to some sort of form. If you're editing that form, it's a little bit annoying if your app restarts from the beginning every time. So you can set this option to reload the current form automatically when it picks up changes. Which is very handy. It'll lose the context of that form, so if you had a back button that was supposed to go back to a previous form, when it reloads, it won't have that. But if you're in the middle of designing the form, adding buttons, moving things around, changing styles, this is very handy. Now, one aspect of hot reload that we've always had and is even faster is the themes. So in our tutorial here, the first thing we wanted to do was demonstrate how to change some styles. So I'm going to go into the style file and I'm going to delete all of this stuff. I'm going to leave the constants here because those are necessary. At least the include native bool command tells us to use the native theme. The default font size int is helpful for setting a uniform default font size across all devices. So I'm going to change the style of label to make our Hello World label blue. Color blue. And I'm going to save. And this should update almost instantly. So there it's, our label has changed to blue. Now, one thing that you may be wondering is how did I know that the UIID, or the style that I needed to set, was called label? I happen to know that labels use a default UIID, but what I usually do if I'm trying to style my app is I will use the component inspector. This is inside the simulator and it's under the tools menu. You can open the component inspector and this will allow us to drill down on the tree. You'll see I selected container. That selected the whole thing because that's the whole content pane. So you can see what is selected if I want to see what the UIID is. And if I drill down, okay, that's the title bar, but I was after the label. So there's my label, and I can see once I selected that the UIID of that label is label. Similarly, if I go to this one, this is also a label, but it has a UIID of title. So if I wanted to change the title to be blue, well, I could do it in a couple ways. I could just do this so that labels and titles are blue, or, let's see, I'll remove that, or I can give it its own style. And there, titles are blue. So it's very versatile and quick to try out different styles. Now another way to change this style, let's get rid of this and let's go directly into the source of the start page. I can change the styles inline also using the style.uid, oh, not UID, style FG color equals, let's see, blue is 0000 FF. And there we go. That also changed the color to blue. It's a little bit slower with the hot reload to change the styles in the source code, but not a lot. You're talking just a couple of seconds slower. Just want to take a moment to talk about the XML tag attributes and how they work in the CodeRAD XML views. There's one example I've already done here, style FG color. That is basically the same as, well, I'll throw in a little bit of Java here without having, I don't want to create a Java file just for this, so I'm going to put in a script tag. And as an example, label L equals new label. So here's a label that's the equivalent of what we have there. L get style, set FG color 0, and then L set text hello world. Okay, so that label is the is basically the same. Now in this script tag I can actually should be able to do that. Yes. So the way script tags are processed is they run in the context of the parent element. So this, and then the parent component is given this special name, variable name it. So inside this script tag, I can access a reference to this container that uses the box layout Y as its layout manager in the variable it. And so I've manually, using the Java API, created a label, set the style, and then added it. This is equivalent to this, essentially. Now, I just want to talk about how these attributes work. So any setter in the Java class can be set by just remove the set, and by convention we make the first letter lowercase. It's actually case insensitive, but all of the type hinting uses the lowercase to start it out. So that style.fgcolor is the same as getStyle set fgcolor. You can even go deeper in the chaining. There's no limit to the number of levels. So you can see that this was a sub-object that we were setting a property on. That's why the dot notation. And there's an autocomplete feature. So if I want to do preferred H, preferred size, it shows all the different things. We could set the press style, all styles. We could even set the parent. So you can see if you're familiar with the setter notation, it's very easy to translate that to the XML attributes. Okay, so let's get rid of all that stuff that I did there, and I want to show you a different way to override the style because sometimes we don't want to change the color of all labels in the application, and sometimes we don't want to use the inline styles. In fact, it's better to use the style sheet if possible. So we can create our own custom label style by adding the UID attribute, and we'll make a custom label. Now, as soon as I do that, my label is going to look funny, but now we'll add a style for this. And the first thing, I want it to inherit from the default label style, so I'm going to do cn1 derive label, and that will allow it to inherit all of the styles from the label style. And I'll just make the color of this one blue. And as soon as I save it, it updates to be blue. So this is multiple ways to achieve the same thing. This is my preferred approach usually if I want to customize some text. Just changing the style of all labels, I'm always a little bit scared to do because there might be some labels in places that I didn't think of that need the default style. And we can go back into the template here and compare label a regular label, and I'll save that, and we should see UI change to show our regular label. Okay, and I want to talk a little bit about the tag names themselves, how to create components. We already talked about how the attributes map into the Java API, and you can guess that to create a component in codename 1, we can just create a label of the same name. And in fact, all I have to do is start typing, and the autocomplete will pick up and show me all the different options I have. Now, by default, most of the core codename 1 components and CodeRAD core components are included in the namespace. They have some default imports. If you have third-party libraries, then you would need to add an import statement. So that is done with an import tag, and inside here we can add whatever we need to import. So as an example, let's just create a custom component. My app will create a new package. Is that right? Why don't I see package? new, okay, do directory components, and new, this is odd, new Java file, and we'll call it my component.java package example. Maybe that's it. My app components component extends component. Actually, let's extend label just to make it easier. And that's, we want to import the codename 1 version. Okay, so this is just a my component. It extends label, so it's basically the same as label. And if I want to use this from my template, let's just try this right now. This won't work, but let's try it to see. So I'm going to open, not terminal, but run. So I can see, how did that work? Oh, it just didn't pick it up. But let's text equals my component. Okay, and we'll see if that adds it, and it will not. But if we import it, import oops, example my app components, then it should reload, and my component is there. So this is how we can add additional components. You can use any component. It can be components that you create. It can also be components that are core in codename 1. These import tags are tracked throughout. It's just like doing a Java import statement. Now let's have a little bit of fun and add a few more components here. So we'll remove these two, and let's add a text field with a hint. And maybe another text field with some default text. You'll notice I'm doing a variant here. This is, you can add text inside a tag, and this is the same as doing text equals some text, adding default text. It's sort of text is a special property. If it's there, then it will use the text content of the tag if you provide it. Let's add a password field. And how about some multi-line text? You see it's already updating here. There's my password field. Some multi-line text here. Right, once, run anywhere, truly native cross-platform app development with Java, Kotlin, for iOS. And I'm just copying it out of the tutorial or desktop. Okay, let's see how that span label gets added. How about we add a calendar component, checkbox while we're at it. And let's put some text in this checkbox. And just to knock them all off, we'll add a radio button. There we go. When we select that, that's how that works. And span button, click me, and a multi button, text line 1, text line 2, is a description, text line 3 equals a sub description, text line 4 equals line 4, why not? Okay, so that's a few components added just to demonstrate all the different components that there's our multi button at the end and how quickly it updates our simulator so that we can easily try things out. Okay, let's now delve into some of the meat and potatoes of CodeRAD. Let's just put most of this back the way it was. We'll go back to 0, label, hello world. And I want to show you actions. Actions are a way for us to add functionality that is handled in the controller but can be injected into the view in the form of menus and buttons. So the way it works is you start with the view, and the view decides what kinds of events or menus or buttons it needs to have. So in our case, I'm going to add an action. Well, I'm going to add a button first of all. And we'll call it Hello World. I'll get rid of this one here. And now when I click this button, I would prefer if it sent an event to my controller. So the way I need to do this is I need to define an event, or an action category. And there's a define category tag. And I set the name to anything I want. I'm going to do hello clicked, and I'll be able to reference this from the controller in order to inject functionality into my button. But first I need to bind the button to this action. So I'm going to move the hello world into the text attribute because I'm going to add a subtag, bind action, category hello clicked. And what you're going to notice that when I reload this, I'm going to hit save right now, and this is going to trigger a change, and oh, my button's gone. This is because when I bind an action to a button, what it's expecting is that an action in this category has been defined in the controller. And if it's not found, then it'll just assume that there's no action to bind to, so the button actually isn't displayed. The controller action can actually override all aspects of the button, including the label, icons, and enabled state, all the things like that. So let's go into the application controller, which was the first thing that we had. And I'm going to override a method called initControllerActions. And this is where we define all the actions in our controller. So there's a builder, action node builder. I'll import this class, and all I'm going to do is handle this action. So add it to this controller, and I want to use the start page clicked action, I believe was it. And it wants an event handler. So I'll just put in a print statement so that I know that it got what I was looking for. Now, it is highlighting this clicked action in red, but, oh, it's because it's wrong. So I define my category as hello clicked. So that's why it's highlighting it. Hello. No, it's still complaining. Oh, but you'll notice that my button is back. Now if I show the console here so that I can see, I'm going to click on Hello World, and voila, it is clicked. Now it is good practice when you're handling events to consume the event so that it doesn't propagate up any further. In this case, we're already in the application controller, so it's not going to propagate up any further. The application controller is at the top of the event hierarchy where the events propagate to. So this this is the end of the line. But if we had a more specific controller that was earlier on in the line, we could prevent it from propagating up with event consume. Now let's change this to something that doesn't require us to look in the console. I'll show a dialog. There we go. And as soon as I save, my app will reload. And now, when I click Hello World, it says, you clicked me, with a nice little dialogue. So I jumped right into this. Hopefully I didn't skip too many steps of how this works. The general flow is the category is used by the view to advertise which action categories it supports. So things you might, if say you had a bottom menu on your view, maybe you'd create a category called bottom menu, and your controllers could then define actions in that bottom menu category, and the view would display them as buttons. So this is the general idea. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into the features that actions give us. So let's look at where we define the action. And I mentioned before that you can override things like the button label and icon, but I didn't show you how. So let's go back to our builder and change the label here to click now. And we'll add a badge because we can do that. And let's add an icon. Image. And is there anything else? Not for now. So I'll just save my changes and take a look at what happens to my UI. And look, my button changed to click now. This is despite the fact that it still has text hello world. This is because when you use bind action, the action itself takes precedent. It will override any of the properties that you had in the view. And in this case, we've explicitly set the label to be click now and the icon to be material alarm. And this is handy as it gives you control over the action functionality in your controllers and not in the view. It makes the view more reusable since your controller can adjust what the actions look like in the view. Now we can also, like in this case, we just created a single button, but we can also create menus with multiple actions. Using one way to do that is using the buttons tag, buttons with an S, and it's got an action category attribute, and we'll create, well actually this is going to require that I do create a new category. I'll create one called main menu. So this is kind of like the example I was describing before with a bottom menu, but in this case we're going to create a main menu, and it should appear just below the Hello World button. So let's save our change and see if anything's changed yet, or make sure it compiles first of all. And it's still got the click now. Let's go back into our controller, and we're going to add a few options here. And actually, I want to add I'm going to add 3 actions here, and just to save time, I'm going to copy and paste them from the tutorial. Creating menus here. Okay. Let's copy and paste these directly in. Hope that works. Oh, is that just a reused alarm? But that's okay. Okay, so here's my menu that comes up just below it. I've got all these buttons, notifications, playlist was clicked, so you can see each one is going to its appropriate controller. So this is a convenient way to add menus in. You'll notice that these buttons, or this menu, was laid out using a flow layout. We can change that by setting the layout attribute. Let's change it to box layout Y. And now they're laid out in a box layout Y layout. Similarly, while we're at it, let's try out the grid layout. This will just take a second. And there we go. It looks a lot like the flow layout, but trust me, it is a grid. Now, you can also change the style of actions in the buttons tag. It's got a notion of an action template that will be applied. So there's a sub-object that we access with action template, and you can see all the different options it gives us here. Action template, it's got the badge, condition, icon, all these things. In our case, let's change it so that the icon is at the bottom. Action template action style equals, oh, and look, it's actually giving us a drop-down list of all the different options. The reason is that action style is an enum. Any enum properties, the XML schema automatically will show you the list of options. This is one of the nice features of XML. So let's put the icon at the bottom. And there we see the icon at the bottom. No, I don't think I like that very much. I'm going to go icon on top. And while we're experimenting, how about icon only? The buttons attribute also supports overflow menus. Sometimes in the view, you may want a menu, but you've only got room for 1 or 2 options. So for example, I can add limit equals 1, and that will ensure that there's only room for 1 action. And in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to place this little overflow menu. And when I click on it, it'll give me a pop-up action list with all of my actions. So if I change this limit to 2, then it'll give me 2 actions in the default. It gives me this one, and then the overflow with the remaining options. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about form navigation. So one of the things that comes up pretty often is the need to allow the user to press a button and go to a different form. So we could do that using actions. We could have an action trigger, or a button trigger an action in the controller, and then the controller create the new form and display it. But there is a simpler way for this common use case. So let's first create another form. I'll call this, okay, I'll call it about page.xml. And I'll put in some boilerplate. Under construction. There we go. And we'll give that a second to compile the about page. Now, let's add a link to the about page from the start page. So we're going to do that with a button. We'll go button, and we'll say about us. So when I click on this button, I'd like it to go to the about page. And we can do that with the rad href attribute. So I'll use the hash sign here, and then the name of the view. So I wanted to go to about page.xml. I'm going to specify a hash about page. And we'll rebuild, and this should give us our link. There we go, about us. And voila, we've got our about us page. Notice it gives us a little backlink here to go to our previous page. This is because of the controller hierarchy. When you, the default, all applications will have an application controller at the top, but each form will have an accompanying form controller, and each controller has a parent. So if the form controller's parent is the application controller, as our start page was, it will have no back button because there's no form to go back to. If we give the a form controller a parent form, as is the default when we do a rad href link, then it will give us a back button that goes back to the parent form. We can change this behavior by adding a modifier term here, and we can go sibling let it reload, and we'll see how the behavior changes. So we'll click on About Us, and now we don't have the backlink. This is because it is navigating to the About page, and it's treating About page as a sibling of the current page. We could also explicitly say go to the top, which will have the same effect since the start page was on top. There's a few different options you can do. So About Us, this is the same, no backlink. And to explicitly make it a child, which is the default behavior, I can also use the child keyword here. And there I get the back button again. So this is a nice way to get navigation for free. Now, so far, we've been working only with the V and C portions of MVC. In this section, I will introduce the final pillar in the Trinity, the model. Model objects store the data of the application. In CodeRAD, model objects implement the com.codename1.rad.models.entity interface. We're going to skip the conceptual discussion of models in this tutorial and dive directly into an example so you can see how they work. After we've played with some models, we'll circle back and discuss the theories and concepts in greater depth. Most apps need a model to encapsulate the currently logged in user. Let's create a model named User Profile for this purpose. We'll create a new package in our Java directory for models. New, this time we got package. And let's create a new file or a new Java interface, and we'll call it user profile. And it's going to be interface. Okay. So to make a model, we extend the entity interface. And that's in the RAD models package. And we need to also add the RAD annotation. And what this does is it tells the annotation processor to generate a concrete implementation of this interface, and it's also going to generate a wrapper implementation of this interface that allows us to convert more easily between different but compatible entities. So when we're creating models, one feature of CodeRAD is loose coupling. And in order to achieve loose coupling, what we do is we have a notion called tags, which we can use to tag properties in a model. And in an ideal world, we would use tags that are separate from the model itself, but for expediency, we are going to create our tags inside this model. I'll explain this. So the first thing here, I'm going to do some imports, tag and person. Okay, so I've created this tag. It's a public static final field because we want this to basically be a constant that we can use to reference the name field. And we're setting this to person.name. Now person is a class in the schemas package. The schemas package includes a bunch of generic schemas that describe different types of models and their properties. And things like, well, thing is the root, person. And they'll have things like email, name, identifier, thumbnail URL. And these are common attributes that generic views can be designed to support. So in this case, I want to have a field in the user profile that represents the name of the user. And the photo URL field will be the same as thumbnail URL. And an email field. I'll start out with just 3 fields. Now I'm going to create the public interface. And oops, it's an interface, not a class. And I need to tag at least one of the getter or setter for each property with the RAD annotation so that the annotation processor knows that we want these methods to be generated as properties. So it will generate concrete implementations with the implementation class and the wrapper class that is created for user profile. So this is a very basic model object that we can use in CodeRAD. Now let's create a view for this model. So we'll go back into our RAD views and let's create a new view called user profile page.xml to view a user profile. And when I create a new view, I usually just give it a Y layout. I could do any layout there for the top level. I just find Y very convenient. And in this layout, well, first I'll save it here so that it'll compile it. There we go. And it should, oops, that's not what I want. Okay, there we go. This is what I wanted. The first time it compiles, it adds this little namespace location schema, this boilerplate to it. So I wanted to give it a chance to add that before I started typing. And I am going to import my user profile class here so that I can use it here. com.example my app models user profile. Okay. And we'll do title, my profile, label, name, rad label. Now the rad label is basically just a label, but that has a binding to a view model property. So it takes a tag, and I'll do person.name. And this will bind this to the model property that is tagged with person.name as, well, actually, let's go back to our user profile. I think I forgot something here. I need to specify the tag. My bad. Equals photo URL. Some of this may seem redundant, but it's for loose coupling support. Email. There we go. So that without that, things are not going to work quite right. Okay, so I've got rad label, and it is bound to person name. I'll do label email rad label tag equals person email. Okay, so that's all set to go. Now I want to declare that this view uses the user profile model as its model. So rad model equals user profile. Now I can use just the simple name because I imported the user profile here. If I did not do the import, then I would have to use the full com example my app models user profile. So this rad model is the fully qualified class name, but it will work with imports properly. Now I just sort of glossed over the use of rad label here for binding. It is in fact possible to bind labels also just using this notation. Bind, text equals Java. That notation would work. You could, which is short for get entity, get, I think, get name. That would work also. But I find that, well, and that's assuming this bind text was on the label that's supposed to display the name. The rad label provides a little bit of extra binding nuance. It doesn't make as much difference with labels, but it does with text fields. Now there's a whole set of components that start with rad that provide built-in binding using the tag attribute. So there's a rad text field, a rad picker, a rad radio button, and these all these sorts of things. Pretty much all of the core components have a rad counterpart that does the binding by default. So let us add a link now from the start page to our user profile. And we'll just put a label of user profile for the linking. Oops, I've got a mistake here. That's not going to compile very well. and we do have an error. Let's see what the complaint is. Rad href equals user profile. Ah, there we go. Page. This highlights how much of a difference the hot reload feature makes. And there we go. We've got this nice blank form. And because we haven't specified which model, it's just a blank. So let's add a model that it can use. So in our application controller, inside, I'm going to override the onStart controller method. And this is a good place to add anything that you want to have available in the controller. Anything that you want to put in your constructor for your controller, instead put into here. So we'll create a user profile, new user profile impl. And that impl class was generated by the annotation processor automatically. File set name. And we're going to add a lookup. Now this user profile. Now this is a way to make an object available to essentially the entire app. Because we're in the application controller, if we add a lookup there, any subcontroller of the app or view can do a lookup on the user profile class and find the user profile that is stored under that. So in this case, let's assume that we're saying that this profile is the logged in user. There's only one of this. So we can use a lookup to find it. Now, in order to access this from our view, let's actually add it to the start page, and then we're going to pass it to the user profile view. So the start page, I'm going to add a var tag, and the lookup user profile. I need, in order for this to work, because user profile is a class literal, I'm going to need to import the user profile class into this template also. I imported it already into the user profile template, but I need to import it here too. There we go. Lookup, and we'll give a name. This will allow it to be used as a variable inside this template. We'll just call it profile. And we'll save that. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to change the rad href directive here to pass that profile as the view model. And there's the syntax with a curly brace, and we can reference any variable because this var tag has created a variable named profile with a lookup on user profile. And so we're adding it to the rad href here, and I think, yeah, okay, so I'll change it. Reload, and now if I load this page, there we go. We've got Jerry and Jerry at example.com. This is the user profile that we created in our controller. And just to review our user profile, this is the rad label with the tag to bind to the name property that is causing these labels to have Jerry at example.com there. Now that we've got a couple bindings here, let's have a little bit of fun with bindings. I always like the demos that show multiple fields bound to the same model properties so you can see multiple components update at the same time. So let's add a text field. Text field. There we go. tag equals person email. So we're giving it the same tag as the label, and we'll save. Now this is an example. It went back to the first page because I have hot reload set up to reloading simulator. For now, because we're working on a subform, I'm going to change the hot reload to reload the current form. So next time I make a change, it's just going to come back here. So notice how, okay, this label and this label are both bound to the same property. Notice how I can just type in and delete, and it updates them together. That's always a lot of fun. We can also add bindings to other component attributes. Let's add a save button, for example. And we can make it enabled equals false, say, so that the save button's there, but it is not enabled. Okay, oops. Okay, so we can see same sort of thing. Notice that it didn't preload with my Jerry this time because we passed the Jerry from the start page. There are other ways to get the model to come in there, but I'm not going to hook that up just right now because we just want to play with the binding. Right now it has an empty model. And so right now the save button is disabled. But what if we change the binding so that it depends on something? We can go bind enabled, and I'll bind it to this Java expression. Let's see. I want the email to not be empty. So let's do it the long way first, not get entity, which calls the get entity method on the view. It's a this view is a subclass of abstract entity view, which has some methods on it, such as the entity, which is a reference to the view model. So get entity is empty, user profile email. And so what this says is the save button will be enabled if the email field is non-empty. So let's compile, and we'll try this out. So right now it's disabled, but oh, as we type, there it is now disabled. So that allows us to do that. We can also bind to other properties. Like here's an example with binding the foreground color. Style. Get entity is empty. And we'll have two possibilities. If it's empty, then it's going to be red, and if it's not empty, then it's going to be black. Assuming I did everything correct there. There we go, empty, red. Let's start typing. Oops. There we go, and it's changed to black. Now one thing that I noticed early on when I was developing this was I just want to get the profile email, just the email field of the model. This is a little bit much. I don't want to have to type all that. So anywhere inside the RAD views, you can use a macro syntax like this. Email, or you can even do person email. Either will work. Is empty, and we could change the same thing to here. It's a little bit shorter. Accomplishes the same thing. Same thing. Now, another thing that we can do with bindings, like so far, it was a little bit jerky. See, when we get, there we go, it just sort of jumps a bit. It just, as the label is either shown or not. But we can make that a little bit smoother by adding a transition. So let's add the rad transition attribute, and I'm actually going to do it on another container. So I'm going to make a container, but I'm going to bind the layout so that I can change the layout to be something different depending on the model properties. Equals. Oh, what's going on here? IntelliJ. IntelliJ is no, not liking something. Okay, so I'm going to set up a rule that says if the text, well, I'm going to set up a, oh, where is it? Oh, actually, let's talk a bit about transitions now. Now, by default, changes to bound properties take effect immediately upon property change. For example, if you bind the visible property of a label, then it will instantly appear when the value changes to true and instantly disappear when the value changes to false. Interfaces feel better, though, when changes are animated. The rad transition attribute allows you to specify how transitions are handled on property bindings. Attributes that work particularly well with transitions are ones that change the size or layout of a component. The following example binds the layout attribute on a container so that if the user enters flow, the word flow, into the text field, the layout would change to a flow layout. And for any other value, the layout will be box layout Y. So I'm going to return to the start page here, and I'll create a few new things. First of all, I'm going to define a tag called layout that we're going to use in our model. So this is going to implicitly create a property on the view model for the start page. This is actually a little bit of new information, but so we're going to start with that, and then I'm going to bind to this a text field that binds to the layout, and I'm going to create this subcontainer Y with a bunch of labels. Label 1, label 4, how many do we want? Let's do 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And let us set up the, well, let's actually just try that out. Okay, so here's my initial layout, and I want to make it so that the layout changes when you enter a certain value. Bind layout equals, oops, Java flow equals layout text new flow layout new box layout Y. And that should be right. Okay, let's try this out. So since this text field is bound to the layout property, I've got this, the layout property also bound inside this Java expression to the layout of this container. So if I enter flow, oops, oh, so it actually didn't take effect right away. This is because that it requires a either a refresh or an animation. So we can trigger this using transition. So I'm going to set the transition of the layout attribute to be 1 second. And we'll let it reload. And there it changes. I delete that, and it changes again. There it changes. So this is where the RAD transition can allow you to do some pretty cool things. You can also set up transitions on multiple attributes. You just separate them with a semicolon, enabled, 0.3 seconds, or you could do milliseconds, 300 milliseconds. Right now we don't have enabled listed, but we could bind enabled equals Java well, enabled isn't going to help us here anyways. So far, our examples have involved only views of single models. Most apps involve list views where multiple models are rendered on a single view. For example, in mail apps that include a list of messages, each row of the list corresponds to a distinct message model. CodeRAD's Entity List tag provides rich support for these kinds of views. To demonstrate this, let's create a view with an entity list. The contents of the view will be a little bit changed. So we're gonna work off of our start page template, and we're gonna delete almost everything here. Okay, delete that. We're gonna change the root tag to a border, just for fun, and we don't. We'll keep those in those locally, and border. Okay, and I'm going to add an entity list tag, layout constraint. I think it added something here. Yeah, I don't think it should have. This is IntelliJ adding something on us that we don't want. There we go. I wonder why my there we go, layout constraint center, and we're going to add a provider attribute. I'll explain what this is in a minute. com.example.myapp providers.sample list provider class. Okay, so the way this works is the entity list expects to have, and it will create its own entity list model. Now most applications need to reload these lists using something like a network request or something asynchronous. So just setting the model here kicks the can down the road to having to do some complex things to fill the model. So we introduced the notion of a provider, which will provide data to the entity list when it wants it. And this allows us to support things like pull to refresh, and infinite scroll. So I'm going to create this sample provider class, which provides data to the entity list. So we'll create a new package, providers, new class sample list provider. There we go. And this is going to extend abstract entity list provider. It's going to implement just this get entities method. And this is what the entity list view is going to call when it needs to get entities. And it passes a request to let you know whether or not it wants to refresh, or if it wants to get the next batch, if it's doing infinite scroll. But so we got a lot here, I'm gonna cheat again, and I'm gonna copy and paste directly from the tutorial here. There we go. So that's not it. Oh, we've made it quite far. I know I've got this. There it is. Okay, so let's just copy and paste this. All this does and do some imports here. And that looks pretty good. So it's when it calls get entities, it passes the request, and we are going to create an entity list, and we are going to pass it to the request complete method. And this allows us to do it asynchronously also. So the assumption here is you're probably going to be making a network request usually in this sample list provider. Now in this case, I'm just hard coding a list with 3 profiles. There's me, Shai, and Chen. And save that. Go back to our start page. We've got that going. Let's take a look at, it's not reloading, so I might have an error here. Oh, we do have an error. And I think it probably stems from the fact, oh no, sample list provider. com.example sample list. example my app providers does not exist. Okay, did I add it to the wrong place? Sample list provider? No, it should. com.example.myapp.providers does not exist. I think it is because, oh, okay. When adding a new package, this is a bug that I'll have to fix. When adding a new package, I think it's not set up. The simulator is not monitoring that directory. Okay, so now we've got another error. Let's see what it's complaining about. Compiler. Symbol hello clicked. Oh, that's right. Because I deleted a bunch of stuff from my view, we were referring to a few things, the hello clicked and the main menu inside my RAD app here, that no longer exist. So let's remove all those things so that we can get an app that works. And we'll let it load up here. Okay, so right now it's giving me this little infinite progress indicator, meaning there's something wrong. It's not getting what it needs. Ah, yes. It is not enough just to create the sample list provider. This provider is working as a lookup. So I need to add a lookup to the sample list provider. So we can do add and register, or is it just add lookup? New sample list provider. And this is because the start page is expecting to look up the sample list provider as a lookup. And so now that we've added it inside our controller, there's my list, and it's doing the refresh, but there's nothing else there but these three. Every time it does a refresh, it's just going to get those same three. So the next step, as you can see, this list was fairly plain Jane. What if we wanted to change what each row looks like? Well, we can do that by adding a row template to our entity list. So create a row template tag, and the way it works is whatever's inside this tag will be considered a row. So we'll add a container with the border layout. I'll give it a UI ID. And I'm going to use the profile avatar component that is a core CodeRAD component that displays an avatar. Size, we'll do 1.5 REM. 1 REM is the line height of the default font. So 1.5 is 1.5 times the line height of the default font. And I'll add a label with the name. Center. And a font. I set the font. Native, main, regular, 1 REM. So that's the font size. And component style, margin left. Let's set it to 1 REM also. I like setting dimensions in REM because it's line height, so it'll change pretty gracefully to whatever screen size we're on to match how big the fonts are. And that should be good for now. Let's save and see what happens. And then I will go through this code a little bit. Oh, we've got a problem. Probably what I forgot to do was add a layout. Yeah, or I spelled layout constraint wrong. It told me that, and I just didn't listen. There we go. Ooh, beautiful. So the profile avatar, by default, since the row model doesn't have an image registered in the thumbnail URL property, it will just create this nice little thing with the first letter, and the color is calculated based on what letter it is. So it's kind of like the Gmail type experience, and it displays a template. One thing that's happening a little bit under the covers inside the row template is that the context for the view model is changed a little bit. Inside this row template, when you are referencing view model properties or doing bindings to the view model, it will be referencing the model for the particular row rather than the model for the entire view. And oh, one last thing, because I did create this sample list row, I'm going to close that. I'm going to set that style in my style sheet to be white. That's not going to make much of a difference. Border, I'll give it a bottom border. as a separator. And we'll give it some padding. Okay, and we'll see how that turns out. It should make it look a little bit cleaner. And there we go. We've got a little bit of separation. Now, the next thing, while we've got our rows, we may want to be able to respond to events on the row. Now, the first thing we might want to do is just add a button and use the rad href attribute like we did before to link it to another form. So maybe we want to link this to the profile for that row's record. So let's create a button and put it in the east of the row, and we'll link it to the user profile page that we created before. And I'm going to use these open and close curly braces to make sure it passes a model to the user profile page. And by not providing a model, it's just going to use the model in the current context, which is the row. And it's user profile, so it happens to be the right kind of profile. So we've got that. Make that a bit bigger so we can see this better. Okay, and I'll save that. And now we've got our little show profile button on each row. If I click on the first row, there it shows my profile. I'll go back, click on the second row, and it shows Shai's profile. So this is a fairly easy way to get like a master detail type thing for free. Now, this show profile button, it kind of bothers me because it takes up so much real estate, and really we just want to click on each row. And this is what Codename 1 lead components are for. So let's hide this button, and we'll add a lead component to the container. Lead component equals, we need to give our button a name, I believe, so we can reference it. Actually, no, we've got, actually I will. Equals show profile button. Lead component. Now this rad lead component, it's using a component selector query to be able to select a component inside itself. And in this case, we've given it a name of show profile button, so I can use this notation. If I could also have done like UIID show profile button, and you can look up things by UIID just without that hash. But I'm going to use a name because I don't need to waste a UIID on this. And what the lead component does is it passes all the events from the container to its lead component, which in this case is the show profile button. You see the show profile button is no longer shown, but if I click on the row, it still does what I want. And that's because the click event was passed from the border layout container here to its lead component, which is this button, and this button has a rad href attribute attached to it to go to its profile. And so we have in very few lines of code, something of a master detail relationship that you can easily scroll through a set of records and click on a record to see more details on it. Earlier, we learned how to navigate between forms using a button tag with the rad href attribute. When developing for tablet and desktop, you may want to navigate to a different view within the same form. sort of like using frames in HTML. A mail app will often have a list of messages on the left side of the screen and details of the currently selected message on the right, as shown in the Gmail app screenshot that you can see in the tutorial. In our previous examples with RAD href, we specified which view we wanted to navigate to, but we didn't specify where we wanted the view to be displayed. By default, it navigates to a new form whose form controller is a child of the current form controller. The full syntax of href supports targeting the view to a different location in both the view hierarchy and the control hierarchy. For example, suppose we wanted our view to be displayed inside a sheet instead of a new form. Then we could just add the sheet modifier for the target instead of child. So let's do a little bit of experimenting. I'm going to do this right inside my start page again. So I'm going to, I think, yes. Start page. Yes, I'm going to rip this all out. And instead of border, I'm going to use a split pane component as the root here. And I'm going to create var name equals profile. Pull my app models user profile. I'm going to create a lookup to the user profile still, because I'm going to need that for some of the views. And I'll have a subcontainer with the menu. And I'll have a few links here. I'll just start with one. We'll refer to that in a bit here, and this will be about page. Now, border. Do a little heading for the form. North. Example. Oops. And place this content panel in the center. Okay, so this content panel is referenced in this RAD href directive. So before I save this so you can see what it does, let me describe what it's going to do. So I've got the split pane component as the root view. The way split pane works is it expects two child components. One is going to be on the left or top, and the other is going to be on the right or bottom. So in this case, the default is to have it on the left, so we've got the Y container is the first component that's listed in split pane, so it'll be on the left, and then this border layout container will be on the right, and it includes something in the north that just explains what's going on, and this empty container that we've named content panel, and we're referencing it here. This is also using selector syntax like the component selector, very similar to jQuery. So it's able to reference this content panel as the target of our link. So let's save this. Assuming all goes well there. There we go. So this will look a lot better on the on tablet, but let's try it here first. There we go, under construction, because our about page just said under construction. So let's change to a tablet skin. So we'll do about iPad Pro. Okay, so that looks a little bit better. This is how split pane works. Ooh, we've got a little bit of stuff going on there. Under construction. Okay, well, let's add a few more options here for navigation. Let's navigate to the user profile page that we made earlier. And same thing, we're going to target the content panel. And what should we call this one? My profile. Now we're not passing, actually we are. Okay, we're going to pass the profile that we created a lookup to here as the model to the user profile. And I'll save it. That should reload. Okay, so the second link goes to my profile, and so it is linking to the user profile page. It's passing the profile model that it's getting from this lookup, and it's telling it to load into this content panel. So if I click on that, there it is. And the same bindings work. This is a live view. So this is a convenient way to convert your mobile app UIs into UIs that are a little bit more appropriate on the desktop or the tablet. We can also use, like right now I'm using the tablet skin, but if I'm testing for desktop, I might also want to just use the desktop skin. And you can see the same thing there. Now you can also have it load up in a sheet. Let's load the, say, the About page. So we don't have much to work with right now. And sheet. There we go. There we go. So that loaded up the About page in the sheet. It makes everything just a little bit more reusable. Now you can also use the rad transition attribute with the rad href attribute. So for example, rad href, and we'll do 0.5 seconds, and we'll do a flip transition. How about? So right now we're on the About page, under construction, go to my profile, and there it flips. My sheet, go back to About page, my profile, and it does a flip. Now on the simulator, it does a simulated flip. It's not actually true 3D. On iOS and Android, you'll get a true 3D flip using the 3D graphics GPUs on those devices. Okay, well, so far we've been using just the application view controller as our controller, but as your application grows, you might start to find the application view controller to get loaded up. Like right now, we've got nothing there, but you can imagine how once you've got 50, 60, 70 actions throughout your project and events that you need handled, you'd want to modularize and create separate controllers. And we can do that with the view controller directive. So I can go view controller equals some path. So first I'm going to create a view controller to use. So I'm going to create a controllers package. This is where I usually place my controllers. So package and new class, and we'll do I'll call it start page view controller. I'm going to call it start page view controller, not just start page controller, because there actually is a form controller generated by the annotation processor called start page controller. And just to avoid name getting confused, basically confusing myself. It's in a different package, but I could still confuse myself. Extends view controller. Import that class, create a constructor that matches. Perfect. Now I can reference this controller from my start page. It's example my app dot controllers. There we go. Start page view controller. Get a better look at it there. And what this will do is it will attach the view controller. If I just reload this, it's not going to change much. Okay, so this won't change much. I've got this controller, but it doesn't do any processing yet. So let's just confirm that this will pick up my events. Let's add an event category or an action category. Just like before, except this time we're going to place it button bind action category. Okay, in this case, I'm not even adding a text attribute to the button. I'm going to do all that inside the controller. And okay, let's go to our start page view controller, and I'm going to override init controller actions. I'll import, I'll set the label, click me, add to controller this, start page, clicked. I've got to import that one too. And let's see what I want to happen here. I'll use the toast bar. Show message, show info message, so I don't need to provide that. Hello clicked. I would have thought that it picked this up, so I guess that's erroneous. And let's see, click me. There we go, you clicked me. It picked it up. So this is just an example of how we could create our own view controller, and it separates it out from the rest of the application. Yet it's symmetric, so the same thing, I could copy and paste this directly into the application controller and it would pick it up because the event is propagating. Actually, that reminds me, I should stop it from propagating because we're handling the method here, so that if there is something listening to it in the application controller, I just want to prevent that from happening. I want to prevent it from getting it. Okay, there's all kinds of fun stuff we can do, but I just want to focus on a few key things. Another thing that you may want to do is use one of your views within another view. So the example I've made in the tutorial is an address form. Because sometimes you've got a shipping address and sometimes you've got a mailing or a billing address that is different. So I'm going to create a few new forms. So I've got a contact form and an address form. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to copy and paste some of these forms from the tutorial. So let's see, my app. New file, and I'm going to do first address form. Okay, we'll leave that for now. We'll get back to it. And contact form. Just the boilerplate. Okay. And actually, let me just copy and paste some stuff here. Views within views. And here's our address form. And our contact form. Okay, then I'm going to discuss this a little bit. And I'm actually going to, well, the tutorial actually shows us manually making the contact form the default form, but I don't think that's completely, well, actually, why not show how to do it? So here we've got the start page controller as our default. Instead of that, let's do new contact form controller. We'll make the parent the application controller, just so you can see how it works. Now this contact form controller was automatically generated by the annotation processor during compile based on the contact form. So it's a form controller that just makes it easy to use the contact form view. Okay, so if I save this, it should, okay, it's stuck. Okay, now when I reload this, this is my contact form. And I'm just going to close a couple things that I opened here. So let's take a look at what I did here. I have created a contact form that's got a couple of fields itself, name and email, and then it has a couple of addresses, and it's embedding address forms that I created that's referencing this view directly here just as a normal component, because a view is a component, so we can address it directly. Now when you're embedding an entity view, like all of these views are, they require a view model. So if you don't provide a view model, it's going to try to take the default view model it gets from the context. So in this case, I'm just defining a new view model. So it is going to create a new view model of the appropriate type for both of these forms. So initially, the addresses will be just empty addresses. But we can take this a step further. Actually, so this is roughly equivalent to new address form model impl if we imported that model, which we haven't. We'd also need an import statement. But so I'm going to leave that like that for now. And we can go a step further. We can change the way this works so that we are storing the billing address and the shipping address inside the view model for the contact. So I'm going to create billing address and shipping address properties on the contact itself using define tag. This is in the contact form. Value equals, oops, I need a type on this. Type equals address form model. And initial value, it uses the same shorthand to create a new address form model. If I don't add this initial model, then the default value will be null. Okay, so what we've done here is I've added two fields to the contact form model to store the shipping address and billing address. So we've got two copies of the address form model for that. Now we can reference these right off the view model in the view model attribute for the specific address forms. So we can do this. Context get entity get. Is this the billing address? Billing address, and this one will be context get entity get shipping address. Okay, it still seems to work there. Now I could also use the macros to make this a bit shorter. As we see here. Ooh, oh, didn't like that. There, I like that a little bit better. Now we can also have a little bit of fun. I just want to have a little bit of fun here and set both forms to the billing address. So they're working off the same objects. I don't know why this tickles me so much, but being able to change one thing and see it update in the other. So we can see because these views are both bound to the same model, they will update in unison. So I'll change it back to shipping. So they're separate. And let it reload. And now they are indeed separate. You update one, it doesn't update the other one. And that is going to be the end of this grueling tutorial session. I will be doing other tutorials, and I will be doing screencasts for other specific features that are much, much shorter than this. But I hope you got some value out of this, and I know I certainly did in sitting down and doing my tutorial myself. I encourage you to check out the resources that are available for CodeRAD and Codename One, and I hope to see you join the community soon. Thanks for watching.